Hi, so I'm Chris, Senior Policy Fellow for Technology at the Tony Blair Institute. We published a paper recently on technology policy called Technology for the Many. This was all about understanding how we harness the opportunities and deal with the challenges that technology brings for politicians and policymakers. You can find it on the Institute website if you've not seen it before. In the meantime, folk who have been reading the paper have been firing us their questions and comments about the paper using the hashtag TBITech. We've been keeping an eye on these on Twitter, on Facebook, via email, and what I wanted to do now was just take a bit of time to share with you guys some of the questions that have come in and our take on some of the issues that have been raised. And I should say all of this are difficult, complicated questions, so this is probably the start of the conversation rather than definitive answers, but really pleased that we're having this debate today. Okay, so let's talk through a number of the questions that came up and we'll see where we get to. So first question was from Lap, and he asked, why set up a new government agency when enlarging current departments could net a similar result? And this is to do with one of the recommendations in the report around setting up a new Department for Digital with senior political leadership. Now, I think there's kind of lots of ways that you can cut the debate on machinery of government. The reason that we are talking about a new department is probably threefold. So first up, I think with technology being such an important issue, one of the risks if you put it into existing departmental portfolios is that it gets sidelined because the government department is already busy with the activities that they're focused on, and kind of maintaining that degree of momentum is hard. I think the second thing is thinking about the overall strategic importance of the issues. So technology is one of these domains which cuts across everything, and being able to hold all of that in one place rather than having it distributed around different bits of government is really important. And then the third thing, and I think the one which is most important, is trying to use this as a way to actually foster change in government itself. So lots of the machinery of government in a country like the UK is designed in the 19th and 20th centuries. I think there's a lot of scope for changing the way that government operates and making it fit for the 21st century. And one of the ways that we do that is starting with a new locus, bringing in new ways of working, new sorts of people, and the best way to do that is with a new department. Okay, second question is from Harry, asks, how do we ensure rigorous data privacy standards in an era of global data mobility? Now look, Harry, this is really, really hard, right? I think that data is integral to all the new technologies that we talk about through the paper. And privacy is something which people are really cognizant of at the moment. I think aspects of this are to do with regulation, and you're seeing strengthening regulation, particularly in Europe, around GDPR and other aspects of this which are designed to try to protect privacy to different extents. I think there's a conversation to be had with some of the big industry players around this, and what sorts of standards and safeguards should they put in place when collecting information and storing it in a way that is properly protected against hacking and this sort of thing. I think there's an aspect of personal responsibility in here. All of us, when we load these apps onto our smartphones, we're guilty, I certainly am, of clicking through the terms and conditions without necessarily reading every single line of them, and oftentimes we should probably think harder about the privacy implications of the decisions that we take. But it's difficult because the data that we share is also the data that powers some of these platforms, and there aren't easy answers through it. One thing that I do think is exciting is some aspects of new technologies which would enable better control of personal data, so make it easier to share only the information that you want to share with a company or an organization, and try to stem some of the data leakage which happens at the moment. So those technologies are in their infancy, but could potentially be really, really exciting. Okay, next up is a question from Steve about policy making. So you talk about using policy modelling as a way to drive policy at a national and local level. How do you get people to believe in it when there can be a reluctance to believe in black box predictions? So great question. One of the things that we talk about in the paper is trying to advance the state of the policy-making profession in government. There's lots of debate about what people call evidence-based policy-making, right? Using data, using pilots, using controlled trials to understand the impact of the decisions that politicians and political leaders make. One of the things that we talk about is using new technologies to try to bring a bit more transparency around some of these questions, and using new techniques to get a better handle on what the impact of policies might be. And I think you're right. I think when this is a black box, it can be hard, because how do you know how a decision was arrived at? But one of the upsides of modern technology is there are ways to use this, I think, to bring more transparency in. So I'll give you an example. Say that we were thinking about should we build a new tram line in a large British city. The traditional way of doing this would be to commission some economic impact studies, long discursive documents, some economic models. Nowadays, the technology exists to do large-scale simulation of the way that people move around a city, to try to understand the potential impact on commuting patterns, for example. What's really cool about new technologies is we could open that up, and why not, as well as just publishing the summary report, why not publish the model? Why not publish an interactive tool which lets people see, if you put the tram line down different streets, or you look at it at different times of day, how that would affect the way that people are moving around. So I kind of hope that there would be ways through this which make policy making not just better decisions, but also help people understand why decisions were arrived at. And that is going to require new sorts of talent, new sorts of technology in government, but something that we should all be excited about. Right, next up, Mandy. So Mandy is asking about medical technology. What technology improvements in particular would you advocate to address medical assistance for the aging population? How do you envisage assisting the elderly, most of whom struggle with technology and do not use smartphones or the internet? This is an excellent question. I think, and I think in here, my take on this is less about specific technologies in a kind of clinical context, but I do think there's some interesting developments happening around the use of preventative and remote monitoring tools for elderly people. You can supplement home visits with technologies that help you detect fall, for example, which in an era where you've got to get rapid assistance out to people can be tremendously helpful. I also think there's an angle in here around just human connection and loneliness, right? So for a lot of older people, there are medical issues, but also social isolation is a real thing. And being able to make those connections using the internet as well as in person can be really powerful. It can mean that the times that you do get out of the house or you have people around to visit, you can have a conversation and a human interaction with them rather than they come to fix the boiler or fill your cupboards, which could be tremendously beneficial. But the point about people's ability to use technology is really well made. I think we struggled in the UK for a long time with the digital divide. It's something which a lot of governments have talked about closing but never really solved. And having the skills and confidence and ability to use the internet is something that we know is less well developed in the older population. And part of that is about investing the effort to help people get to grips with new technology. And we know that that's not about online learning. The best way to help somebody who's kind of daunted by the internet is to sit down with them one-to-one and take them through the basics. And that's pretty labor intensive, but it ought to be done. I also think there are some big upsides around new technologies. So you think how hard a desktop computer and a mouse is for some people to use, and how tablet computing has made that much, much easier and more accessible for some people. I think the next frontier of that is voice assistance technology. And you see now relatively inexpensive devices in homes which strip away the kind of difficulties of interacting with technology and can be really powerful. Clearly some privacy issues and other things you're alluding to the earlier conversation, but potential for really transformative impact on people's lives as well. Okay, next up Andrew. So Andrew is asking about education and careers, right? So he says, for non-science and tech students, what educational and career path would you advise following in order to get into this policy area? And I think this goes to the debate at the moment around, you hear a lot about digital skills, technology skills, how do you get people set for the economy of the future? And I think there's a couple of things that I think about this. So one is, it seems pretty apparent to me at least, that some basic level of understanding of the principles of coding and computer science, not super technical, but just the basics, will be important across a range of disciplines. And you see it all around us now, even in all sorts of environments where understanding the logic, understanding how a system was potentially set up to work on something is really important. But I also think there's a growing acceptance or realization maybe that a breadth of skills is important, and a lot of the really interesting, exciting work is on the intersection of technology and other domains. You start to see people used to talk about STEM, right? Science, technology, engineering, mathematics, and people nowadays talk about STEAM because they've inserted arts into there. And it's to do with the cutting edge of using technology in the creative industries, for example, where it's generating all sorts of new applications that weren't previously thought about. Equally, as technology develops around things like machine learning and AI, there's a school of thought that says that the important skill will be asking the right question and interpreting the results. And the machine learning will do a lot of the heavy lifting in between, where you would have had human beings writing hundreds of thousands of lines of code. Now you're training a system which is kind of self-learning and self-reinforcing. But it puts a premium on being able to ask good questions, be analytical in the answers. So I don't think there's a kind of set course to study. I think that a lot of this stuff will change rapidly over time. But my sense is that being in the place where you bridge disciplines will be an exciting environment to be in the future. Next question is from Richard. So Richard says, many traditional trades are having to deal with complex technological systems. What do you think a reappraisal of the vocational training landscape, which embraces both higher and further education to deal with technological change, should look like? Now, this whole question about education, the future of work, is something where there's lots of unknowns and a lot of debate at the moment. Certainly in the paper we talked about the potential impact of automation on work, the way that would change not so much entire jobs, but tasks within jobs, and the impact this will have as some people need to retrain and pick up new skills. Some professions may be entirely automated, others less so. I think there's a few things to think about in terms of the training landscape. So first up is that this puts more emphasis on technical training, vocational training, the ability for people to access those sorts of courses in times and places and throughout their careers in ways that suit them. And those sorts of hands-on skills which enable you to get into good, productive work in a very practical way will be important, right? If you're going to do training throughout your life, then it has to be fulfilling, but also help you into a better job and a better career. So it's got to be much more focused on getting people into work. I also think there'll be aspects of this which become more important. So you're right to ask about all sorts of systems that used to be professions and trades now involve a lot of technology. But there are other aspects of working in this environment that will be important. So you're seeing increased importance of entrepreneurial skills, for example, like starting and running a business, working on a technology platform that connects a tradesperson with customers. Requires a different set of skills maybe than you would need in the past. And also some of the relationship aspects of this, so that it becomes more emphasis on understanding customers, understanding the issues, building relationship with them, and less about the mechanics of some of the tasks. I think the really hard thing in here will be the accelerating rate of change. Professions that maybe felt stable for a long time are now changing very quickly, and if you rely on technology, which is also moving very fast, then staying abreast of this, I think, will be the hardest thing. Think about how quickly a mobile phone updates, and then apply that across the board. Okay, and last question here is from John, and it's a good one to end on. How can technology be used to improve national prosperity and ensure that benefits are shared fairly? Now, this is a gigantic question, and there isn't an easy answer to this. But there's a few things which we pulled out in the report which I think are really central. So first up is thinking about whether we've got the right infrastructure to set the economy up for the future. And a lot of that is about modern infrastructure, particularly around broadband and internet. And we talk about that in the report, and ensuring that works not just in cities, but actually across the whole country. Some of this is about investment in new technologies in the workplace to boost productivity and enable people to have more productive jobs. And the third is ensuring that we're able to break through into new industries. So the UK certainly should be at the forefront of technologies like driverless cars or AI in medicine. but we really need to push hard to make sure that we're on the cutting edge of that and we're able to commercialize it in ways which will benefit businesses and the wider economy. And do that in a way which ensures that everybody can participate. So they need the skills, they need the access to infrastructure, and we need a good settlement around work and working lives that ensures that we put all this technology to work, benefit as many people as possible, as widely as possible. Okay, so that was like a fascinating set of questions. Like I say, I think we are just at the beginning of a debate around all of this. I'm delighted that folk have been reading and engaging with the report. Love to continue the conversation with people, so carry on sending us your comments via the hashtag, which is TBI Tech, and you can find us on Facebook, Twitter, email yourviews@institute.global, and look forward to sharing more on technology policy and continuing the conversation over the weeks and months ahead. Okay, thank you.